the United States faces economic upheaval that challenges us to rethink who we want to be as a nation, I've discovered that it pays to take stock of who we have been, a country of innovators and doers, of people who make things, of workers who work, toil, sweat, and labor with their hands. So my book shares some of their stories and explores the values of physical work. Today, standing in the belly of the fireboat, I look through the engine room portholes at the meager few finger piers that still remain. I register the gaps like empty spaces between the teeth of a broken comb. Buoyed by history, I consider how the past informs the present. The Hudson is known as the river that flows two ways, its waters a brackish mix of the tides pushing seawater upstream and fresh mountain runoff pushing down. I know what it's like to feel pulled in two directions at once. I oscillate between worlds, white and blue collar, virtual and physical, human and machine, preservation and obsolescence, land and water. My days on the Hudson transport me through the past to the present, granting me uncommon access to the lasting lessons of history that somehow feel more important today than ever before. So I'd like to share just a few stories from this birthplace of American industry, beginning in New York City in the 1900s, where all along the waterfront, and also up and down the Hudson River, the world's cargo changed hands. Shipping had fueled the city's economy, making Manhattan the dominant American seaport since before the Civil War, and one of the world's major international ports by 1900. Now, it's interesting when you look at what Manhattan looks like today, it's really hard to recall that this was the hub. This was the maritime hub of commerce. But when you sort of hark back, you can look a little bit and see some of the remnants, and I'm going to try to draw those links here today. By the 1920s, West Street teemed with trucks ready to transport barrels, crates, and pallets full of cargo. Everything that you had in your home, everything that you had in your workplace that was not made locally was moved overseas, and it was moved in cargo vessels that were break bulk cargo. It wasn't, today if you're going to get a packet of rubber duckies, those rubber duckies all swam over the ocean in a container with a bunch of other rubber duckies, all the same goods, and then they got lifted off, not even opened, brought to New Jersey probably, to Port Elizabeth, and offloaded in that way. Back during this time, not only was cargo shipped by hand, moved onto the ship by hand, and taken over the ocean in passenger and cargo ships that did double duty, it was also taken off by hand, and you'd have longshoremen rolling this stuff up the gangways and getting it onto the street level, and then the trucks would come in and pick it up. Here we see the 1930s. Covered piers fanned out like fingers around the edge of Manhattan, a horizontal city that extended over the water, spreading like the reflections of the skyscrapers above that stretched up. Steamers, ferries, and tugboats pulling strings of barges behind them created rush-hour traffic on a laneless thoroughfare. This was a major hub of maritime trade, a center of commercial shipping. Whenever a ship arrived, the longshoremen were waiting. Having read about offloading jobs in the papers the day before, hordes of dock workers assembled on the streets near the piers, dipping now and then into local saloons to take shelter from the cold. The lucky ones, whom the bosses had picked for work, braced themselves for what would be a grueling day, well aware that hundreds of men stood ready to take their place should they falter. They worked for days on end, with little more than a meal break, laboring in sweltering shipholds in summer, navigating rain-slicked gangways in spring, and on winter days they skidded across icy docks, all while hefting up to 300-plus pound loads. I got this stat that I'm about to give you from a gentleman who's the head of one of the largest commercial shipping port facilities in Port Elizabeth, New Jersey. He told me that back then, so this is by hand, everything that's moving, a worker was expected to move 1 ton each hour. It's no surprise they suffered 3 times as many injuries as construction workers and 8 times those suffered in manufacturing. Brutal as it was, though, the work paid better than anything else that was readily available to a blue-collar worker without a high school education, and these were coveted jobs. Although no one in the harbor in the 1930s could hear the change coming over the harbor's busy hum, the wave of waterfront industry on Manhattan's shores was already beginning to crest. More than a century ago, these shorelines were lined with manufacturing enterprises that harnessed the Hudson's resources. These resources fueled the path of industry that helped to carve out a new United States separate from Britain. The river strengthened our status as a sovereign nation, but now the vestiges of Hudson Valley manufacturing lie hidden under the grass and tucked between the trees. The scene out the wheelhouse windows looks nothing like I imagined. Among the vanished industries is brickmaking. Today's bucolic tree-lined banks belie the fact that material gouged out of the shoreline once supplied scores of brickyards along the river's edge. By 1910, the Hudson Valley was the largest brick-making center, not in the region, not in the state, not in the country, but in the world. Where do you see the evidence of that? It's really hard to find. It's kind of interesting, right? Okay, ice industry. So today, as I was saying, ice is a nuisance. It impedes our ability to ship fuel oil up and down the Hudson River, which raises fuel costs. So as soon as that tug pushing a loaded barge of fuel oil gets stuck in the ice, the meter starts running, right? So then we all pay more for our fuel. Ice is a nuisance, but back before mechanical refrigeration was used in a widespread way, in the 1920s is when that happened, the Hudson River ice was a product. It was harvested in winter and then sold throughout the year. And something that I find completely remarkable is that it was actually sold, it could last longer than a year. So if you had kind of like a warmish winter and you didn't have such a great crop of ice, you could actually have a bumper crop from last year that would supply you for the following year, which is kind of incredible when you think of, okay, what did they do? Store it in a freezer? No, they didn't. How did they do this? This is why I was like completely transfixed to find out how this happened. Ice harvesting was a major industry for the mid-Hudson Valley with 135 ice houses between New York and Albany. And where are these big, long conveyor belts going? They're going into these massive ice houses. These are, if you got a sense of scale, maybe 200, 300 pounds. That's how big we're talking. 135 of these lining the Hudson. Where are they? They're gone. They were wood structures. The way that they kept the ice from melting was a very intricate system of double walls stuffed with sawdust. Then they would take the blocks and they would pack them in sawdust. And certainly there was loss. Some stuff melted, but with that much ice together, it actually was able to maintain year after year, as I say. So these are several stories high and up to 300 feet long. I just found the fact that you could keep ice on ice frozen for that long, just really a remarkable feat of engineering using the most simple of materials. So right there, the West Point Foundry made landmark contributions to U.S. history as it became one of the nation's largest and most successful ironworks of the 19th century. Its importance stemmed not only from its products and technology, but also from the company's embodiment of the social and technological changes at the dawn of America's industrial Iron Age. The foundry exemplified the transition between craft-based production and modern industrialism. So before, you'd have cottage industry, you'd have a small shop, family-run, usually with somebody else who might be hired on to help, but small operations. This was a big mine-to-market operation where every piece was contained within the company. So jumping ahead to more recent history, are you guys all familiar with the Storm King Mountain? What happened? So I'll just run through it just briefly, because a lot of people are familiar with it. This is where you start to see the shift away from the Hudson River as a just this vast swath of resources that could be used in any way that anybody could see fit to for advancements, for manufacturing, for anything that you needed. It was basically something to take, something to use, and go forth and be merry. There was a new concern that raised its head during the 60s when Con Edison in September 1962 announced plans to carve out the side of Storm King Mountain. This was their plan. They wanted to carve out this little chunk of the mountain here. And they wanted to build the world's largest pumped storage hydroelectric facility by chunking out an entire side of the bluff. This bluff located in Cornwall, New York, on the west bank of the Hudson, about 47 miles north of Manhattan. So a whole bunch of people got really mad about this idea, and there's a lot about the mythology of Storm King and the Hudson Highlands, which I won't get into in great detail, but people were rising up and they were trying to find this new fledgling organization. Scenic Hudson was stepping in to try to make sure that this didn't happen, and they found all different reasons why this shouldn't happen. And really what the issue was an aesthetic concern. And there was this notion that it was time to stop this just, complete ravaging of the Hudson River Valley for industrial purposes, and that there was actually something valuable in aesthetic consideration. Again, you're seeing this leveraging of the economic argument. So in this, the anti-plant activists were recognizing a new model taking shape along the Hudson River. More than a century after manufacturers denuded whole hillsides of hardwoods for tannins and fuel, Hudson riverfront communities claimed heritage tourism and peaceful panoramas as the new lifeblood of local economies.